Today's guest is Randy Blubaugh. I met Randy in 2014 while working at Cash America. Randy was in an HR role specifically around compensation and recruiting. I got to like Randy pretty quickly, very easy. He's an easy guy to talk to, very smart, very thoughtful, lots of insights, in a great bedside manner. There's so much more to Randy than compensation and HR. And in this episode, we double click on that, as they say. We dig deep into who Randy is, how he got there, what lessons he's learned along the way, and what ultimately made him into the great individual he is. I know you're going to enjoy this episode, so let's dive in. Hey folks, thanks for tuning into the show. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, the Podcast Index, and Podcasting 2.0. We'd really appreciate if you download Fountain, find us there, and support us via value for value. We hope you enjoy the show. Happy listening. Randy, welcome to the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Vic. I'm looking forward to a great time with you here this morning.
Me too. I really appreciate you coming on today. Hey, it's Friday and it's the morning, and you're one of the few morning shows I've done. So I got to tell you, I'm feeling pretty energetic. We might be onto something here with this time of day.
I love it. Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right. So Randy, why don't you start off by telling the audience who you are and what you're currently up to?
Okay. Well, I'm just a farm boy from southern Kansas who's had a chance to travel across the country and do a lot of interesting things in the corporate world and then in the entrepreneurial world. And right now, I'm actually living up on my ranch and I'm focused on investing in others and being an advisor and a mentor to other people.
Fantastic. So for the audience, I met Randy just over 10 years ago. As a matter of fact, last month would have been 10 years since I first met Randy. We worked together at a company. Randy was in the human resources department, wore a number of hats. But what I remembered about meeting Randy immediately was his super positive outlook, his go get it and get it done mindset. And Randy, the thing I remember most about you early on, obviously we've gotten to know each other better over the last 10 years, but you have a very practical approach to problem solving. You're like, okay, problem, let's step back a second. Let's think about a couple things, boom, solution. And then you would always come up with a number of solutions. And I don't think I can recall a time where I saw you flustered. So in my observation of watching you, and I'm sure behind the scenes, you wanted to, you got frustrated at certain things, but you never showed it. And so when people talk about EQ versus IQ and talk about poise and talk about these things, these are not things you pop out of the womb with. These aren't some pixie dust somebody sprinkled on you. These are learned skills. Yes, it's part of your personality. Yes, it's part of your upbringing, but these are skills that I know you acquired along the way. So what I would love to do today, and there's a term here that I'm picking up from the young folks. I always say, let's unpack that. Uh-huh. Some guys younger than me are saying, let's double click that. So let's double click that today. Talk to the audience about, go back as far as you'd like. Like, how did this all start? How did you start forming Randy Blubaugh?
Well, when you look at it, it really goes back to where I grew up. And growing up in the country in southern Kansas, my grandfather had a farm. And by 10 years old, I was out driving a tractor, a large tractor in the field and working the ground. And, long days, and wanted to do a great job for him to make him happy. And I realized early on, those were my motivations. I really wanted to please somebody and not only just do what they asked me to do, but try to do it in the best way possible. And, starting early like that. And then at 12 years old, I was hiring out to other farmers and bucking bales and making sure that we could stack them just as best we could, and taking pride, and doing whatever I did the best I could. Then, during my teens, I worked at an old fashioned service station in a small town in rural Kansas. I don't know if you remember or not, but back in the days when you used to go out and pump the gas, for the customers, that's what we did. Yeah. That's what I was hired to do. And then we had a shop in there where we would run vehicles in, change oil, change tires. But it was in this rural community. And what I found out was being around all these farmers, these guys would be working from sun up to after sundown every single day. And when they would come in, they just had the most jovial attitude. It was like they were just enjoying life because they liked what they wanted to do, what they were doing. And when they came in, they treated me, a teenage boy working in this service station, like I was a king, like I was very important, and talking about stories, how my day was, what was happening in the sports I was playing in high school. And it was through those conversations and wanting to make them happy and just truly, understanding the importance of relationships. That was the foundation. I think it really started there.
Randy, you're blowing my mind right now. And I normally wait a little bit longer to share, but you just blew the roof off the top of my head. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay. Question: how old were you when you started working at that service station?
At 14, as soon as I was able to get my learner's permit to drive in Kansas.
Okay. So you don't know this about me, and I didn't know this about you. And there are no coincidences in life. And this is, again, why you and I are connected. I started working for my grandfather at a very young age, and I wanted to make him proud of me. And he gave me so much praise for the things I did very young, like single-digit age. Put tools in my hand, did things, whatever, we could do a whole episode on that. But my dad, who was a white collar worker with a blue collar soul, couldn't keep his hands clean, did air conditioning and refrigeration, self-taught, but he worked at a service station on Saturdays because he loved fixing cars and he wanted to have access to lifts so he could work on his own cars. So I remember he would make nothing. He might make $25 for working for the day, but he'd do brake jobs and he'd do oil changes and he'd do anything he could. So what did I do? I went to the service station with him. I didn't get paid, but I pumped gas. We had a lot of taxi cabs coming in. I lived in New York at the time. They'd throw me 50 cents, 75 cents, $1. They'd tip the kid. I'd go in and check the register. I'd check oil on cars. I did the same stuff. And you know what? When you talk about the way you were treated, I wasn't treated like a kid by these guys. And everybody had a nickname. There was a guy, his name was Carl Eglowitz, who was like the head gas attendant. His nickname was Lefty.
Yeah.
Because he was left-handed. They called him Lefty. I mean, it was, I'm going to let you take it from here because I'm already breaking my rule of talking too much, but you just blew my mind. I mean, you blew my mind. I can appreciate that experience more than anybody listening, probably. So please continue.
And you're right. And nobody took themselves seriously when you're talking about Lefty. There was Shorty, there was Skeeter, everybody had a nickname. You're exactly right. Yeah. So no, I agree with you. The foundation that both of us received, I think has really formed us, and who we become. And to be able to take it. And your story is just amazing, but after I was in high school and I had the chance to go to college, was the first one in my entire family to go to college. And I did graduate. It took me a little extra time, but I did graduate. And I first thought that I wanted to play college football. So I went to Butler County Community College and was going to play football. And I found out very early on that 5'10", 200 pounds was probably not a good size for offensive center for college football.
I had the same challenge.
Benevolent. And then I had the chance to go to Kansas State University for a while. And lo and behold, relationships are so important. I wanted to be active while I was going to school. And I got a chance through some relationships I had to work at one of the local college establishments, with libations and live bands,
Ah,
and wound up becoming the manager. And we
okay.
would have live bands come over from Kansas City. We would pack the house out. We'd have about 500-600 people, in there. And the ability to serve and to keep everyone, engaged in that type of environment, it's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of challenges as well. And again, it's a follow on, wanting to make sure that everybody was having a great time and taking care of all the people. I think you'll find with everything that I've done, it's always been to put myself in a position where I'm serving others. And I feel that that's just paramount, because if I treat everybody with dignity and respect, and give them what they need to be successful, then they in return, will give me everything that I
Yeah.
need, as
Yeah.
well. After college, then back in the mid 1980s, there were not a lot of opportunities back then. If you remember, Vic, uh, the inflation was high, interest rates
Yeah.
were high.
Through the
Not a
roof.
lot of people were hiring. So I went to work for a food and drug company. The parent company is American Stores, but I started out in retail operations. I was going to
Okay.
go somewhere where I knew that I could, serve people, and did that for a couple of years, and then was asked to go up to Chicago and to go into a service marketing role for, with the Photoshop category and the food and drug stores. There, I had a chance to start, really get into the corporate type of world, you might say, and develop relationships and travel extensively. And then went back out into operations. Uh, then I wound up becoming a general manager of one of the locations. And it wasn't long after that, I was tapped on the shoulder and they wanted me to come out to Salt Lake City and go into a human resources role. And specifically, it was in compensation. Now,
How did you go from operations to HR? Like, what did they recognize in you at that moment where they go, oh, this guy, he's been successful here. Oh, let's put him over there. Tell me about that transition.
now that's a great question. When I was in the corporate role in Chicago, I had developed a lot of relationships, and people knew who I was. And I believe it's through those relationships and the fact that I would do what I say I was going to do, and that they had a lot of confidence and they could rely on me, to
Mm-hmm.
come through.
Yep.
And I was able to travel down to Texas when the parent company was Jill Food Stores, American Stores was going to change Skaggs Alpha Betas over to Jewel Food Stores, and I was responsible for transitioning one of the with that category, the Photoshop category, and I got carte blanche. I put in new marketing programs, and trained everybody in order to be able to, in preparation for the transition. Now, what came out of that, the transition was not successful, except for my category. We were up 200% in
Wow.
revenue over the trend, that at the time. And so they wanted to know how I did that. And I think one of those types of that was one of the catalysts for them asking me if I wanted a different type of role when they had a need, up in out in Salt Lake City. And what was happening is that American Stores was a holding company, and they had a lot of regional operating companies, Jewel Food Stores in Chicago, Acme in Pennsylvania, back in Philadelphia in the East, and then
Okay.
Lucky Food Stores out in the West. Well, they wanted to make it one big operating company, and so they brought in all the operations into Salt Lake City. And not a lot of people wanted to move from Northern California to Salt Lake City, or from Chicago or Philadelphia. And it created opportunities for other people in the business that they wanted to step up and take on roles that they couldn't fill. And my background in training and serving is what got me into the human resources and specifically compensation.
Yeah.
And that's where I cut my teeth, in human resources.
You were
And
willing to move. You were willing to move.
And you're exactly right. I was willing to
Yeah.
move and go wherever they needed me to go at that point in time in my career.
You mind if we
So,
pause there for a second? Because
yeah.
this is a great topic before we continue through the story. I once worked for a very large company, and I came to that company via way of acquisition. And, I had people that had worked in my organization that had traveled from one state to the next, and then from the next state, ultimately into Texas. And I'd say it, I was working at Chase at the time, and I came from Bear Stearns. I had moved from Colorado to Texas, and from before Colorado, from New Jersey to Colorado, Texas. So like you, I moved for the opportunity. But so had a lot of people that worked inside my organization. So now we're bringing three companies together: Washington Mutual, Bear Stearns, and JP Morgan Chase. And if you looked at the compensation structures, the Chase people, they just weren't paid the way the WAMU people and the Bear people were. Much lower. Somehow, by mistake, a spreadsheet was released to the guy I reported to had a pretty broad leadership team, 16 people, and his admin by accident released a comp sheet to that entire team of everybody that worked in that division. And so I'm in a meeting, and there was a person there who was spitting nails, angry. She got this comp sheet. She's like, I've been here at 16 years, and I can't believe, Joe Blow or Mary Smith makes, $50,000 a year more than I do. I've been here 16 years. And, that person worked for me. And, rather than reach for a hand up, she wanted them pulled back down. She didn't even think it was her opportunity to get her compensation adjusted and right-sized. And so very calmly, I said, hey, how long have you worked here? 16 years. Where do you live? 20 minutes from this building. Have you always been in this building? No, I was in another building that was 25 minutes away. And 8 years ago, we moved into this building, and now I'm 15 minutes away. Okay, so essentially you showed up in the same city, in the same place. Your family didn't move. Yep. Okay. I said, that person right there that you're tugging on their ankles, that person has lived in 5 states in the last 15 years. They moved for opportunity. They moved for advancement. They moved for jobs. And rather than tug on their ankles and pull them back down into the cesspool, push them out and ask them to reach down and pull you up. And the biggest recipient of that was the guy I reported to. Because while my compensation wasn't on that sheet, he knew what I made, because obviously he was paying me at the end of the year. And his boss looked at it and said, we got to fix this. They didn't tug me down, Randy. Mm-hmm. They pushed him up. And when he got a giant raise, and I mean 40% adjustment, wow. 40% adjustment, when he got the adjustment, he came into my office on a visit into Texas, and he shut the door and he said, I want to thank you. And I have a card to you from my wife.
All right.
Yeah, because you must have negotiated a heck of a deal, and you just raised my value here. And I've been fighting for a long time to say I'm worth more. And it wasn't until somebody from the outside came in and said, look, he's worth more, so must I be. And, you did what it took, right? You picked up, you moved, and you went to another state. What's your experience been in leading and running comp and doing this about, I know it's different today with the mobile workforce and lots of people working from anywhere, but through that time, how important was mobility to people's success?
In our type of business that we had, in multi-unit businesses, it was critical. If you were willing to move, that's how you got promoted. That's how you advanced. If you just wanted to stay in one location, that's great. You're going to stay there. You're going to do great. Somebody's going to have to die for you to be promoted. But we're just not going to continue to pay, somebody a lot more money for doing the same job in the same place. It's just not how it works. And, and you bring up a great point there, Vic, when you're talking about equity and people comparing themselves to others. Part of what you have to do when you're setting up these far-flung, extensive compensation plans across 200 some thousand people. They have to be defensible plans, that you take into consideration a lot of factors.
Mm-hmm.
And every decision that's made, you have to be able to defend it in a court of law. So that's how, when I approached everything, in setting up programs, you would set it up with that foundation. Then you had to have a way of being able to make exceptions, because there are exceptions. When if a person needs to move somewhere, or even if they're in the right location, you'll need to
Yep.
make an adjustment because of some experience that they brought to the table that a hiring manager never noticed before. But it's time to recognize that, because that person can do way more that you brought them in for.
Yep.
So there's this whole science and discipline around compensation. But then, it's really such a gray area. I consider it more of an art form. And I brought that forward, especially when you get into the corporate type of entities and the higher up you go, you have to be able to make, the compensation remuneration fit the talent you're bringing in for the impact to the company. And you have to do it in a way, that it's defensible. There is no one size fits all in any of this. Now, I will tell you this: everybody that's in business will believe that they're a compensation expert.
Huh.
And
Okay.
I've heard that over and over again. I know how much I've got to pay this person, and I just know. And you don't need to tell me how much I need to pay this person. They're making this now, and they need to make, X amount for me to bring them over. Yeah, but they don't realize, all the other implications, that go into, the programs. Nobody's a benefits expert. Everybody will feign ignorance on benefits because it's the most complicated thing, but everybody's a compensation expert. And especially when you get into the executive level, the dynamics take on a whole other element, because there's a reason why people have gotten promoted to the executive levels, because they are not shy. They are very logical in their approach, and they like to tell a story, and they like to be able to build up a case, for making, recommendations, for all of their folks, and how much they should get paid.
Yeah.
Since it's an art, you mentioned, what I would do. And the first thing I would do is listen to understand. And I want to give credit to somebody in my career path who helped me more than I can ever thank them. And his name is Clint Janes.
Ah, my man Clint.
And Clint is the one who sat me down, and he looked at me square in the eyes, and he said, "Randy, I like you and you do a great job, but you've got to stop listening to respond. You need to start listening to understand." And I never comprehended that about myself. I have pretty decent self-awareness, but I did not realize I was doing it. And so my focus from that point forward, and that was early on, when Clint and I first met, and but changing that focus helped me so much in helping others and my team members, and just in life in general, even my relationship with my wife, my spouse and my kids. So I cannot understate how valuable, that advice was. And it was a tenuous time, between all of us when we first got there, and it's before you were there, a long time before then. But it was a conversation that needed to be held, and he did it tactfully and in the right way, where it really sunk in.
Boy, what I always hope for in these conversations, and that the goal of this platform here is to leave things behind for people to go, whoa, yeah, I could use that. Well, good news for you, Randy, is we're 22 and a half minutes in, almost 23 minutes in. You laid down one of the biggest pearls that's come onto this series. That is so valuable. Stop listening to respond and listen to understand. Hey, I'll tell you, I'm a lifetime student, and I'm going to use that, and I'm going to call Clint or text him when we're all done here. Matter of fact, I'm going to cut this up, send him a little clip in advance of the release of this, to tease him for the release, because that's huge advice. And I'm not surprised it came from him at all, because Clint he was a very thoughtful guy when we worked together with him, and I consider him a great guy, great individual. Wow, that's huge. So what happened when you made that transition from listening to respond and listening to understand?
The amount of people that wanted to come, and talk to me in a more in-depth dialogue started happening immediately.
Wow. Okay.
And it was eye-opening, because I thought I was doing a pretty good job. I mean, I'd already been hired as a vice president at Cash. Whoops, I am sorry.
Hey, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Stuff happens.
Just a second here. Yeah.
I'll cut this out.
I do
Pause.
like to. Okay, pause. Okay, hold on a second.
Get yourself resquared, and then we'll come right back in, and I will edit this out. No worries.
Okay, very good.
Hey, Randy, once you started doing that, once you started listening to understand versus respond, how did things change for you?
It's interesting, because what I realized is people started, to want to come to me more. They started sharing more about who they were, what motivates them. And the conversations got so much deeper. So the relationships got so much stronger. And when we needed to accomplish something, that was bigger, or if there was challenges that we had to go through together, it was so much easier to work together. When people trust, it's all about trusting each other, as you're going through things. And, it helped tremendously with the relationship with my wife, as well. Because when you're married, you've got to be able to listen to understand your spouse and not to disregard them. Yeah. And all
it fits everywhere. You're right. I mean, that's a huge tool. It fits everywhere. And it's funny, my brain is swirling right now. Not only in my own sort of introspective look at how I listen, but in some people I know who could use this advice.
Right.
Yeah. So I have a gift for people, going forward from here, and certainly anybody who listens is going to get it. How do you, so, you paint a very interesting picture, one that I knew, but not intimately. I mean, I know there's a lot of details on a lot of art and science in putting together equitable compensation. I sense that, there's a lot of frameworks put up because it could be very litigious in the event there's some grievances and things alike. So you've got to think 20 steps down the road. And you got to say, hey, I do this and I can defend it like this. And I'm going to do this and it can be defended by this. And you've got all your pieces and parts together. How important was compensation in finding the right people?
It's important to have a comprehensive package to hire somebody. That's important. It has to be competitive. And if you want to draw somebody away from an organization where they're being paid well, it has to be a material enough change for them to want to come and join your organization. And, it's got to reflect a performance component, that if you can make an impact on the business, then this is how you can be rewarded even higher.
Yeah.
So that's foundational. Now, it's important to understand the difference between compensation to bring somebody into an organization, because you have to have that, at the right level for it to be meaningful. But once somebody joins, the number one reason that they stay is because of the relationship that they have with their supervisor and the culture that they live in, the value system that they're operating in, and do they have an impact on people's lives? So you want to continue to move people ahead, reflecting their contributions, but pay becomes a smaller and smaller component, from the overall picture of why people will stay and perform at their highest levels.
Yeah. I had a conversation with somebody most recently where they said, hey, I was thinking about joining this company at the time and I wasn't really sure. And I jumped in and I met with 8 people during the interview process. And I said, okay, I've been through those, I've when I went to work for Bear Stearns, I think I met with 12 or 13 people. And then, it was literally like a 14, 15-hour day between meeting with people, having lunch, meeting with people, going out to a long dinner, having drinks it was a courting for sure. But they wanted to flush me out. They wanted to see what I was like in the professional setting. They wanted to see how conversational I was over a meal. They wanted to have dinner with me and see what I brought to the table and what my personality was like. They wanted to give me a few drinks to see if I turned into a knucklehead. I mean, it was strategic what they did. Much better than I meet 3 people. But this person said to me, I went to this company, I met 8 people, and I never thought I would work for this company. Do you want to know why I took this job and I dove into it head first? Why? All 8 people said the same thing about the company, about the mission, about where they were headed, about what the values were, about what they stood for. And they said, yeah, the comp was great. And it was so great that, my significant other was like, how do you not take this job? And this person explained there's more to it. But when they met with 8 different people, and the harmony was there, and the story was the same, and the mission statement was aligned, and the reason they were in business and the goals they were trying to achieve there was a congruency there. Boom, exploded. So rip into that a little bit, Randy. Like, what have you seen? How have you been part of creating such things like that? Where have you seen it win? Where have you seen it fail?
That you're spot on. You're spot on with that. The best process that I was ever in that had multiple people that I interviewed, was the Cash America process. And because we had offsite, had a breakfast, then just like you're talking about, then come in, to the office building, and on multiple times, 3 or 4 times to meet different people. And then finally it culminated, with, the chance to meet, the CEO. And even before I met with the CEO, I met with one of the board members who is the chairman of the compensation committee.
Who did you meet with?
Lunch. Jim Graves. Jim Graves.
Oh, it was Jim.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I love that board.
Oh,
they were great people.
Yes, they were. And they still are. They're still great people.
Of course. Yeah. I just don't have interaction with them anymore, but great people.
Yeah. So what's fascinating and the point that you made is that everyone talked about the value system and what was important, at Cash America. And it was consistent. It capped off when I sat down with Dan Feen, the CEO, and this is what hooked me. Because coming from a company before, which was Blockbuster, a big brand name, to a pawn store company, people ask me, well, you're crazy. Why would you want to take a step down to go do something like that? But you get into the inner workings, you look at their heart. Their heart is to serve, the customers, and everybody in the neighborhoods in which we operate, because they just need a leg up, right?
Yeah.
And then with Dan, here's the hook. He goes, Randy, I will never make decisions in the short term to get the stock price up. I will always make the decisions which are in the best interest long term for this company, and the stock price will take care of itself.
Yeah.
Boom. That just hooked me in. And I was so impressed, with the leadership and that thought process and doing the right things, not worried about that quarterly earnings release, made all the difference.
That was a very unique spot because for Dan, think about his history. He was there and brought the company public working with Jack. He spent 3 decades as the CEO. That's a rarity. Right? How many others can we go down a list right now that have been the chairman and CEO of a company for 30 plus years? Mm-hmm. So with that backstop, you have this ability to say, I'm going to focus on the customers and the stock price will take care of itself. Most CEOs have a much shorter tenure, and they know they have a shorter tenure, and they have a certain runway to make a difference and drive up market value and shareholder value. and it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I've worked for publicly traded companies, Cash America being the exception of one that didn't think like this. I've worked for privately held companies. I've worked for private equity backed companies. The majority of the publicly held companies I worked for were slaves to the quarterly earnings. And such that even what I saw the ROI time frames shrink during my 20 years. Hey, back in the day, if I got an ROI in 2 years and it was going to be material, boom, we did the project. It was better for the customer. Let's do it. Then it went to 18 months. And then when there was a pivot, if it didn't come back in the first year, the ROI didn't hit, I'm out. Like, we're not doing it. I'm even having conversations with people in my business now where they're like, think we can get that ROI in 6 months? Hey, in some cases that's possible. In a lot of other cases, it's not, because, the view's not that long. So you're right. That time that we worked together at that company was unique because there was a long-term view. The compensation programs were amazing. The benefits were amazing. Everything was about, the people and the culture and doing a lot of, really creating a formidable structure around that organization. Voted best place to work. I mean, it was pretty crazy.
I know that you asked me, what's an example of an interviewing process that wasn't quite so great.
Yeah.
And I won't share the company, but I will share what the process was. And it's a big name company, and but they have some challenges of their own now. They asked me to come down, and they didn't provide me with the format. I had no preparation. I was just showed to come in for an interview, going to be meeting a few people. And I was brought into a room and sat down in front of this big horseshoe, of desks lined up, with about 10 people all the way around, the desk with me in the middle. And it was a panel interview, everybody at one time, that were just firing questions off to me. So
did they dim the perimeter lights and put a very bright spotlight coming in on a 45-degree angle on you?
That was the only thing left to do to make it any more uncomfortable.
Yeah. And did they have like somebody with like, jumper cable terminals hooking up to your chair? Wrong answer.
You kind of felt that way, but man.
Yeah.
But
it sounds like a fun time.
The most uncomfortable experience, and right away, when they start, the way this question started being asked, I'd made the decision I didn't want to work for the company anyway, but you kind of go through, but it's a very uncomfortable, position to be put in. And so I would encourage anyone that considers panel interviews, to kind of rethink that process, but at least have a lot of other avenues and a lot of other steps in the process, and inform somebody, a candidate, what they're, walking into, as well would be very helpful. Yeah.
When I was at Bear Stearns, I still give them the credit for the best interview process I ever had. So before, I was pulled in from a recruiter. They had a retained search. I was reached out to by this recruiter. I met with that recruiter, a guy named Rick Glass. What a great dude. Rick Glass and Associates. Met with him probably 3 or 4 times. Lots of questions, lots of talk, lots of this, lots of that. And then he put a package together and basically said, hey, I think I found your candidate. I think I found your person here. And so then I did a phone interview with one person at Bear. That went very well. And then they scheduled me to come in. But before I came in, they sent me this document. And they said, hey, we just want you to respond to this document and send it in 1 week in advance of our scheduled meeting. So I had about a week to respond to it. I opened it up, and it was 10 questions that required almost a thesis answer on every single one of these questions. Because, for instance, we have a problem with the network. We run X amount of applications over it. Traffic patterns look like this, blah, 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 blah. Network's not performing. Give me a detailed description of what you would do to identify the problems, potentially, solve them, re-engineer, whatever it was, and you went through it. Then the next, so one was infrastructure, one was security, one was application development, every program management, change control, everything that was in sort of the bag of a CIO. And then the last one is, how would you evaluate where the company is today, and how would you set a strategy, and how long of a strategy would you put together, and what would you do along the way? Randy, I sat down on a Saturday morning, and it took me 12 hours to do this. First of all, me, I'm going to go through it 9 million times just to make sure it's the best I could possibly do. Because, of course, if I read it today, I'd be like, I can't believe I wrote that. I would do things different. You learn more things. But at the time, I was very proud of the response. And it took me a long time. And had I known it was going to take 12 hours, I probably wouldn't have done it in one day. But once I started, I wasn't stopping. And then I teed it up for the Monday morning email delivery, sent it to a guy named Danny Rubin. And then they had a week to digest it. When I showed up the following Monday or Tuesday, the people I met with had an opportunity to review that. That was amazing. That was huge. So if you reviewed that, there was problem solving, there was technical acumen, there were leadership things, getting work done through others, bringing in the right expert. I mean, there was those questions, they were perfectly placed. And you can tell by the types of responses they wanted with the level of detail they defined. And so, and I'll tell you, everybody I sat down with had read that document. And I don't know if they coordinated between each other to say, hey, you grab the one on infrastructure, you grab the one on security. Somebody said, hey, I loved your response on the security thing. Let's dip into that. You said you would do this, that, and the other thing. What was your thought process in getting there? And what's an example of a project you did that was like that? And then, of course, the meetings and the lunch and the dinner and the drinks and, I think I finally peeled off from the crew there. There were a lot of people that went out to that dinner. I think I peeled off from the crew there at about maybe 10:30, 11 at night. It was a work night. And
Yeah.
I was floored. And I was like, it wasn't until much later that I really realized how amazing it was. When I was going through it, I got to be honest with you, I was like, this is ridiculous. I just can't even believe this is what I'm going through. I've never done anything like this to get a job before. I can't believe I'm having to go through all this. But looking back, if I'm ever find myself in a position to hire somebody very senior like that again, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to do the exact same thing because they found out everything they needed to know. How much work was I going to put into that document and the responses? How thoughtful was it going to be? What level of content was I going to provide? How was I going to show up when I showed up? How was I going to behave in 5, 6, 7 situations? Casual, formal, informal, adult beverages, right? Was I going to be the guy puking in the bushes, like party, taking it too far? It was incredible. And there was a guy named Pete Characia who was the CIO at the time. And, you know Pete, right? Yeah. Obviously. And I talked to Pete many, many years after that. And he goes, yeah, that was our gig. That's what we did. Like we actually formulated this process. It wasn't an accident. Like we wanted to flush out as much as we could, but we didn't want to take 6 months to hire you either. But we wanted to be able to flush it out as quickly as we could. So we created these intentional scenarios to put you through to see what your work ethic was like, to see what your social skills were like, see how you're going to respond to question. Genius. And to your point about Cash America, Randy, I'm going to let you jump in here because I'm going over my percentage, but that process was similar. Not quite as the grilling I got, but I met with Clint for breakfast. And all he wanted to determine during that breakfast, and he told me this, if I were comfortable in my own skin. So those were his words, not mine. He goes, yeah. He goes, today I wanted to find out if you were comfortable in your own skin. And that's what I want to bring. That's what I want to bring back to the team is the reason why you should go through the rest of the process. He goes, and you are. You're an easy guy to talk to. And he said, and that's what we want. Like, we don't want anybody who's overly, calculated. And like, we want somebody who has easy speak and that like thinks and listens and can do these things. So it was a great process there.
Well, since, we have some experience there, I do want to share that you are the most unique leader in the technology field, I've ever had a chance to meet.
Oh, thank you.
Your broad background and your willingness to take on a lot of other responsibilities in addition to technology. That's why you're able to move, and shift, into different things. It's because of that core of who you are, which Clint was able to determine, right off. So it was a pleasure to be around you and the leadership that you present, as well.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let's continue on your story. I peeled you off to get into some great topics because you hit me on the chin with some great pearls, some good nuggets, and I had to dig into those. So Cash America happens. We know that story. You're there. I'm going to fast forward you a little bit. We know Cash America went through a merger of equals with a company called First Cash, and there was a lot of change that went on there. I had certainly moved on to do other things. Pick it up from where that happened for you.
Yeah. So, with a change in control, we're all fortunate enough, to have some stock, restricted shares that invested. So, we have a little bit of, bandwidth and runway to be able to figure out what we want to do when we grew up to the next phase of our life.
Yeah.
So I actually had another corporate opportunity that came along and had went through the same process that you had gone through. This was a timed assessment center, 8 hours. And then going through developing marketing programs, believe it or not, for human resources type of role, marketing programs, technology programs, how do you integrate HRS, all those types of things, and then going and presented it, to the executive team, as a group, another horseshoe type table, but I was prepared for it to be able to present all my findings to everybody in a group, just like a regular presentation. So that 8 hours, you had to be very crisp, be able to do that. I'd actually had accepted the role, went down. But one of the things that the assessment center and the discussions that I had with everybody didn't give me a real flavor of, and unfortunately, this is on me, was the overall culture. The values of everybody at this company were so solid, so strong. I had so much respect, for everybody. But they really dedicated and gave 100% of their lives, even a lot of their personal lives that they gave up to the company. Okay. And something that I wasn't prepared to do at this stage of my life, and so I actually wound up unwinding this. And then I looked at an opportunity to go and buy my own company. I had an entrepreneurial itch. I've had it since I was 20 years old. And I finally was able to satisfy that itch and found a service-based company that was underperforming, had a lot of issues, big company, a lot of revenue, but was not profitable because it wasn't running quite right. So I was able to go in and buy that within that year and ran it for 5 years and was able to turn it around, made it very profitable, and had great, like 25% increases in revenue and profitability. Was even great. More than that for the last 3 years, and took the opportunity to go ahead and and capitalize on all the hard work and sold the company. And so now we took the family, we moved up to the ranch that we have up in Oklahoma, but I spend my time now, really focused in on investing in others, both on a financial basis and on a business mentoring basis, and also on a spiritual basis. I believe that all aspects are very, very important. And I'm having a lot of fun doing that, even looking at opportunities in the service-based businesses and skills-based, trades-based businesses. I'm still a blue-collar guy, Vic. At the end of the day, I like
You're back at the service station.
I know. I like simple businesses where people get dirty because there's such a need, and will be an ongoing need, in the United States, where technology, won't replace or eliminate, the need. And but I
hey Randy, my wife had a few friends over the other night. They come by a couple times a week, chit chat while my wife's cooking, and I heard one of her friends say, "Yeah, my handyman came by today. He just upped his rates. He's $300 an hour." And so I had just walked into the room when they said that, and they said, "What do you think of that?" And I said, hey, still think it's a good value. I said, let's use an example. I said, let's say you had a light switch that needed to be fixed. Let's say you had a leaky faucet. And I don't know. And let's say you had somebody put a little hole in the wall, right? And you were going to paint it, but you just needed somebody to kind of patch it. I said, that handy person is going to drive to your house, going to change that light switch in 5 minutes, maybe 6. They're going to fix that leaky faucet by shutting the water off, taking out one of the stems. They're going to put new washers in the bottom. They're going to do that. And they're probably going to put a coat of spackle on in between all that stuff. In that 1 hour, you charge you $300. They're going to knock out 3 things. You call an electrician to do that. It can be $150 to $200 just to walk up through the door. They're going to charge you minimum 15 or 30-minute increments, if not an hour. You're probably going to pay $200 to get a light switch changed. Rinse, repeat for the plumber, rinse, repeat for the spackle guy, right? Or gal. And you got yourself $500-600 worth of services that need to be done if you're not the person that can do that themselves. I said, you're not paying for this person's time. You're paying for all the time before that time. What it took them to get the tools, what it took them to get good at doing it, took them to learn how to do electrical plumbing and spackling all at the same time. I said, so for me, that's still a great value. And when I think about the opportunity for somebody like that, or anybody with some oomph, to go out and make $300 an hour, like providing a service to people who might not be able to do that themselves, I love it. I love it. I think it's entrepreneurship and it's opportunity. It just looks a little bit different than writing code or creating comp plans or running infrastructure. But that's an honest living right there. That's a healthy living.
Absolutely. And there's such a critical need, and will be for the foreseeable future. I do want to go back to this business that I ran, and it was the second largest residential cleaning business in the DFW area, when I bought it. And, the thing about this business is that it had a whole bunch of predominantly women that were working in the business, and they'd never been treated with dignity and respect. And the service was horrible. Customers were terminating, right and left. They were trying to, previous ownership was trying to buy the business, so they go in with low pricing and force the people to be able to, the team members to go out and clean the houses quickly. And it was just running into the ground. So the first thing I knew I had to do to turn the business around, was to get the team members to trust me, to trust me that I was going to do what I was going to say. And so I started engaging, with them, on a regular basis and giving them everything they needed to have to be successful. And one of the simplest things was they needed time, with me to be able to listen to who they were. Every face has a story. And if you ever lose track of that or don't care about the story of those faces that you meet, you're going to be missing the boat. And I'm so much richer for learning the stories of all the faces. And these are people that don't have big houses, don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of influence. They probably live, in a shared home, or a small apartment. Spouses, if they have one, may not feel that they are equitable, in the relationship. And they've never been treated like they're a real person, that they mean something. And I would even, I got a griddle. I would make breakfast once a quarter in the morning for 40, 50 of the folks. You get there at 5 o'clock in the morning, get the griddle outside, the Blackstone, and just making breakfast. And so they bought into me. Service levels increased. When I was able to increase the service levels, I was able to start increasing prices to the customers, because we weren't going to win customers based on price. We're going to win them on value. And it shifted us from a value or a cost-based business, minimal expense, to a premium service, to premium pricing for premium quality, of service. And most people, when they have you come by, their house, they got to trust you. Our customers got to trust us. And not only do they trust you to be in their homes, right? Because all their stuff is there, you're invading their personal life, but to do a really great job and leave the house fresh,
Yeah.
and exciting. And I told everybody, our purpose here is not to clean houses. That's not why we exist. We exist, to improve the quality of life, for our customers. We want to take the stress off of them, because when they come home after you've cleaned, they could be having the most horrific day. They come in the house, it's all fresh and it's all clean, and they can just go, and they relax and get a smile on their face. And that's
Boy.
when you know that it's worth it.
It's funny. When I was a young kid, Randy, my parents both worked very hard. And I lived at home during my early 20s. And I was working and I was doing a bunch of stuff, but I knew that my mother was, she was leaving early in the morning, coming home dinner, then cooking dinner, then cleaning up after dinner, and then rinse, repeat 5 days a week. And then she made herself busy on the weekends, gardening work, cleaning the house, doing all this other stuff. And as I got older and became more aware, like how hard my parents were really working, I would step up on Fridays. Like if I had a flexible schedule on Friday, I would race home. And when my mother would come walking through the door, and she would get home later on Friday nights because she would go to the grocery store, supermarket, we called it food shopping back on the East Coast. And she would go food shopping. And so instead of getting home at 5:30, she'd get home at 6:30 or 7, because she went right from work to the supermarket, did the week's worth of groceries. And later, for many years, when she came home on a Friday, she'd walk in and smell nothing but clean. I personally would say, I got to do something here. I got to earn my keep here. I'm living here. They don't charge me rent. They feed me. They love me. They do all these great things. I would clean the house. And I'm telling you, I'm not talking about straightening up. I'm talking about swabbing the decks, vacuuming, cleaning, dusting. Like I'd crush it. And then I'd wake up on Saturday morning and I'd wait till 8:00 so the neighbors didn't want to kill me. I'd mow the lawn front, back, edge, do all the stuff. Because I was young. It would take me an hour and 20 minutes. It would take my dad 5 hours, he'd run out of juice or whatever. So, but the point you make about somebody coming home and just going, when you said that, I pictured my mother. That's exactly what she would do. And they were and my dad, same thing. When the lawn would get done, he'd so appreciate it. And there is something to coming home, and your spin on not providing a service, but you're improving. Like when your house is clean and you get the sense of order. I know for me, I'm very type A, and I'm telling this story for the audience just so they really understand what you did here, Randy. You changed the mindset of people here and attached them to something different than cleaning and getting out. Like when you're there to make people's lives better, the mission is much more important than I'm here just to mop the floor. And I commend you again, hats off to you. And, and for anybody listening out there where you have an opportunity in your job or your business to shift from a service to a servant, meaning, try to take what you do and rebadge it into how are you going to help somebody improve the quality of their life. I think you'll find that in everything you do. Shoot, I can think about a car mechanic. I didn't change the oil. I gave this owner peace of mind that for the next 5,000 or 8,000 miles, they have nothing to worry about. I've checked the car out. The oil's changed. The car's going to run well, not going to blow up, and I've moved on. There's something to be said there. I mean, that's, I'm going to take a second. I've put a clip marker here in this section so I can come back to it, because this is great stuff. What else did you see? I mean, so, you changed that mission. You did these things. People bought in. You treated people with respect. You lifted them up. You connected them to lifting other people up. Clearly it was successful. You wound up selling the company 5-6 years later, because you had done your job, so to speak. What'd you do after that? And what have you been seeing?
So after that, I took a little bit of time off, and my youngest son plays college football. So we were off in the fall. So we traveled across the country, and what I did was take that time as we were traveling. We'd be gone 3 weeks at a time. And we would stop and make it a point to reconnect, with relationships of people I hadn't seen in 30, 40 years, family I hadn't seen in 10 or 15 years, and putting ourselves in positions, not only just to meet and re-engage and find out what was happening in their lives, but they connected me to a lot of other people. And the conversations, you never know where they're going to go. There were a lot of people in the banking industry, that were in mortgage finance and then business finance, that I just got a chance to talk to because I was there. I was being there for others, and they were bringing back a lot of information for me. So after that 6 months or so, he came back and started formulating, really what those next steps are going to be. And they've entered into another a joint venture with this really energetic, high-powered leader, who is young, but he has so much potential in his early 40s. And we are looking for an acquisition target, in the trades businesses. And he will run it. I will be a silent investor, help with the business structure and help him because he hasn't had his own business before. And
Okay.
those are the types of things that are very rewarding for me to push into somebody else there, as well. So
I just met a guy who's going to come on the show here. I got him scheduled toward the end of June. He's in oil and gas, and then he thought he was out, and he got back in, and I just met him a couple weekends ago. I was at a friend's renewal of vows in church down in Fredericksburg, and this guy and his girlfriend, my wife, we met. We started chatting, and then oddly enough, it was like a welcome. The renewal was the next day. So we meet them, we're talking to them for 2 hours, and we had rented an Airbnb, and my wife goes, "Hey, I know we have separate plans for dinner, but if y'all want to come back to the house afterwards and have a cocktail, come by." Okay. So we got these complete strangers showing up at our place at 9:00 at night that we spent 2 hours with, never met, but we were brought together by common people. So by a common friend. And so he walks into the house, goes, "Haven't done this since college. I mean, just meeting with strangers and coming and having a drink, but this is great." Well, he's in oil and gas. So it's funny you mention this because we start having this conversation. I love learning about oil and gas. And evidently, when you frack, you create, you're unearthing a lot of methane gas that basically it goes into the atmosphere. I mean, there's just not much where they burn it or there's got something, but the energy from that methane is unutilized. And so we start talking through a friend of mine. He was actually his suggestion. My friend Adam said, "Man, why aren't we using that methane to power farms that would run Bitcoin miners?"
Huh.
Like, just think about that simplistically for a second, because you know about Bitcoin, people are mining and you're running. So you really creation of a coin is a transference of money spent on power to the value of a Bitcoin. So anybody who runs Bitcoin miners, they're trading the investment in power into a Bitcoin in the most simplistic terms. Mm-hmm. And my friend Adam has a few miners running in his garage, and I'm sure by now he's at least created a single coin, but nonetheless, and there's a return there. But if you have this low cost energy source and you could harness it and you can turn that into something of other value, whether you're feeding a grid or so, there's a conversation starting there. But I saw something pretty interesting. I have to tell you, I'm not a fan of the look of wind farms. I don't know if you remember this commercial back in the 70s. But back in the 70s, there was a commercial, and it was a guy on a horse, Native American, okay? Native American in a headdress with the makeup, right? Sort of coming through the forest and riding, and all of a sudden, You see from behind, he comes up to a hilltop and he stops. And you see nothing but sky, but you don't know what's sort of down into this valley. And he's at this hilltop, and as the camera pans, you see what he sees down the valley, and it's smog and it's highways and cars and traffic and all of this stuff. And then they pan back to the Native American, and there's just a tear running down his eye. I don't know if you recall that.
I do. Very powerful.
Okay. Very powerful. So I have a small piece of property out in Moran, Texas. We use it as a sort of like a little hunting outpost. It's a lot of fun. And since I've owned it in the past year, when you take Highway 6 going from Cisco out toward Moran, all of a sudden, I mean, there were a lot of wind farms out there, but now they're very visible on the Highway 6 drive. It's kind of a bummer to me, because for me, it's like I want to escape the city and the look of infrastructure and the look of all this stuff. And I go out there and I look at that, and there's both sides of the coin about its efficiency and its safety, and what are you going to do with the blades when they break and done and you can't break them down and they're burying them all over the country. But I saw this new technology that's a stick that stays up straight up, doesn't have blades on it, but it goes like this. It wobbles, and there are gyroscopes in it, and the wind blows it. It's got flex to it, and it creates this gyroscope inside the stick. I saw it online. I'm not sure if it's yet commercially available, but it's one of those things that are being developed. And you could camouflage that. Mm-hmm. You could make it look like a tree trunk. Right? You can put fake branches on it if you wanted to. There's stuff you could do there. I don't know what your take on the wind farm. I love renewable energy. I think certainly, that's some place we got to go to. I don't mind oil and gas either. I mean, we're at a bridge. Technology will change at some point. I think we're ahead of ourselves. Anybody who has an electric car, my hat's off to you. I love it. It's just not for me yet, because the places I go and the things I do require a little bit more sustainability when it comes to refueling and going. But at some point, I know it'll be there. Some point, I also know that we'll have an answer to a quick recharge, or what happens when the battery's toast and it's not $12,000 to get it changed, and all the things we're up against. But for certain people, I have a friend here in town. Guy drives 3-4 miles to his office and he goes home. Mm-hmm. Perfect. I mean, for me, I'd have a golf cart for that, but but perfect. Absolutely perfect for him.
So you're asking my opinion inside.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Just from a historical perspective, my family, historically, was very involved in the oil and gas business, and had property up in northern Oklahoma.
Okay.
And believe it or not, there was 1,000 acres that was purchased by, great grandfathers back in the day, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that happened to be right on top of what was to be known as the Three Sands oil field. And when they hit oil in around 1919, 1920, it popped up so much, it's so prolific, that it was the largest oil field find in the world at that time. And oil companies came from all over. So there was 12 kids.
And this was your great grandfather?
Great.
Okay.
And the oil that came out of that, was so great. You had like 11, 12 kids, one I think passed, but all the kids got the royalties off of that, because the great grandfather that had died, he'd actually set everything up, and he died, in the mid 19-teens, but he set all the oil leases, everything was already set up with the oil company. So when it hit, I mean, there was something like $5 million in royalties, that came off of that within a 3 to 4 year period. That went to
back in the early
family,
1900s.
Back in the 1900s, yeah. So it was very, very sizable. It was very, and it had an impact on us as we were growing up, because the great grandfather, he bought land up in Kansas, and a lot of land, and that became the farm that my grandfather had that I farmed, and it
Yep.
was in the family. So when you look at the oil and gas, and we had oil leases, and on the property that we had up there, there wasn't any actual oil that was produced, but you get the leases and you get money from that. We
Yeah.
have, a history. So I really like the oil and gas business.
Yeah.
However, and I think that we need to be able to continue to have that, for an extended period of time. It's a very viable option. And, as we transition, to other renewables, but you don't have to do it immediately. There's this
Yeah.
whole push to overspend, try to make it happen right away, which is detrimental to the United States, and the impact that it has on inflation, and the disruption that you have in oil and gas. People's livelihood are being taken away. But if you do things on a slower basis and implement it, in a way that makes sense, that's not disruptive, you have a better way, of mitigating the impact of people's lives, over
Yeah.
time as well. Yeah.
Yep. I would agree with that. I'm not an anti-renewable guy. I'm just not extreme on either side. And I think it's going to be a transition. And, we can have a whole episode talking about, the lefts, the rights, the ups, the downs of this thing. But, hey, let's continue to innovate, right? Let's continue to think about our future. Mm-hmm. Hey, Randy, I want to come back to a particular topic. And I'm just going to say, let's call it finding great people. I know you've got a lot of experience in that space, not only from a compensation perspective, but just, in all the places you've worked at some pretty cool places. You've been an entrepreneur, you've run companies, you've turned them around, you're mentoring people. For those who are listening that may be early on in their journey, and if you wanted to put on the lens of somebody looking to bring on somebody in their company, what would be the traits you'd be looking for in hiring people, and how would they demonstrate themselves and present themselves to give themselves an advantage, not only through the hiring process, but through the early stages of their career to align them for advancement?
That's a great question. The number one thing that I look at are people more focused on others than themselves. And it becomes very, very, very clear very quickly. Do others make more, are they other people more important to them than themselves? And what I mean, is if you're going to go work in the business, if you're going to come and work for me, are you going to be really curious as to who I am, how I got to my position, getting to know me, wanting to know about the other people, that they're going to be working with? Or you're going to sit there and just try to sell yourself. And if I try to engage and share a little bit about myself, if you cut me off and don't listen, to understand, but are listening to respond, and how you can put how they can put themselves into my situation, then they're probably not the right fit. That's number one. That's the value system. Because if you are about other people, that means that you're going to be willing to serve, demonstrate, how you've actually helped somebody in your role be successful. Somebody else, not yourself. I don't care. You're sitting in here in front of me because you've done some successful things. But how have you made other people successful? Because if you have that track record, I don't have to worry about whether you're going to do a good job, because you're so focused on everybody else. You're going to make sure that you're right first, that you are clean, you have a good spirit. I mean, it just happens that way. You can just tell.
Yeah.
And so that's the primary thing that I'm looking for in the conversations, because if they aren't going to treat everybody else with dignity and respect, and don't have the foresight or the capability to care enough about others, they're not going to treat them that way.
Man, what a great answer. I'm not surprised by it. I'm actually beaming, smiling about it, because, I have a thing that I tell people, which is you raise yourself by raising others. And leaders don't deliver great things. They deliver great people. and they empower people to be successful. Me personally, I was great. I was fortunate to have had such great, influences in my life through grandparents, mom and dad, aunts, uncles, great family, and then come up through a great career of really just figuring that early on. I didn't put it into words, but I had this gut feeling that I knew if I launched other people that I would get launched around me. There were. Yeah, I tell you, I'm going to wrap in a short story here, then give you the last word. I had a guy who worked for me once before I worked with you, hard worker, really smart. And we were doing he inherited a set of infrastructure that was just on its last leg. Very complex, though. It was tightly woven into the fabric of many things inside the company. He had put together a plan to remediate it. We were going to completely uplift it. He was rebuilding the platform. He had the platform rebuilt. We were going through testing, and we were going to migrate to it 1 week from the current day of where I'm about to take you. The existing platform, we had instrumented, put monitoring on it, and it really didn't have any monitoring on it before, so we never knew when something was going bad. But it got to be such a problem that they was throwing off so many alerts in so many areas, and some of these alerts didn't really have a significant impact on where we were going. That for some reason, he's like, this is a Wednesday. We're going to cut over on a Friday night. He's like, I'm turning the alerts off because, we're up all night with these alerts and they're turning out to be nothing. Like we can't do this 24 hours a day. We gotta figure it out. So he turns the alerts off on probably, I think, Tuesday night. Friday morning, that particular legacy platform crashes. And it's a big data platform that took and ingested data through a daisy chain from all over this organization. And there was a 13 or 14 hour process that ran to refresh the data on a daily basis. It was not designed well, and it was something that was slapped together and grew over time, and we were fixing all of that. But we went flat on our back, and we went flat on our back because we ran out of storage space during one of the processes, like simple, dumb mistake, right? Things were built up, the cache didn't get cleared, ran out of storage, but it stopped. It was like the front car of a train coming to a dead stop and every car colliding it into it. It was a Memorial Day weekend, fitting that, it's about now we're having this conversation. It was 2012, and we couldn't refresh the data. It took 3 or 4 days to recover from that crisis. So clearly we didn't focus on rolling the new platform out because we needed a fresh, up-to-date process in order to do that. That got pushed off. And the guy I worked for was spitting nails. Why didn't we get alerts? How, I'm transparent. Hey, this is what happened. Ran out of space. I thought you had that alerted. We did. The guy shut it off. Who shut it off? It's not important who shut it off. He did it for the right reasons. Like these guys were up 24/7. We were 2 days away from the cut. Like, it's an oversight. This guy has done so many great things in this organization. I want a name. I need an ass. And I said, I'm not telling you who it was. I said, you can fire me if you like. I'm not telling you who it was. You're not going to take it out on this guy. This guy's killing himself. He's done 5,000 things that are great. And this was an oversight. And you're counting on, you need this person to roll to get us out of this pickle and then get us into the next state, which he's been working on for 6 months. Not giving name. Well, I want to address your entire team. I want your direct reports. I want their reports, and I want their direct reports all in the conference room at 5:30 tonight. Yeah, you got it. So this is noon on this particular day. I got everybody in the room. It's probably 30 some odd people in this very big room. And he comes walking in and he goes, I'm not here to chew anybody's ass out. I want to tell you who you're working for. He goes, I was pissed. I was really mad. He said, and he walked through the whole thing about he wanted a name, he wanted an ass, he wanted somebody freaking fired. He goes, this guy right here wouldn't tell me and told me that if he wants an ass, take mine. Because ultimately what goes on here is my responsibility. He said, I was pissed at him. I was really mad when he left my office. And then as I got to think about it, my respect for him quadrupled in about 2 seconds. He goes, this guy is a leader. This guy's got your back. This guy knows all the great things you're doing and was able to explain to me a simple mistake. So I'm not here to tell you I'm pissed. I want to let you know who you're working for, and you're working for this guy. And he got up and he walked out and he didn't look back. And that was a big moment for me, when not only with the team, but there was no textbook that I went into, Randy, where I looked through that and go, what do I do here? It was in me. Like I knew, and you talk about this, raising other people up, but you just, this show is about storytelling. I've not yet told that story, but you inspired me to tell it. But it was a great moment in my life. I still think of it fondly. There are times I lay back and thinking about things that have gone off, and I would have done this thing differently. I would have done this over. Man, I wouldn't have spent that money. Boy, we could have been more successful here. That one, I nailed that one. I just feel so good about it. It fills my heart every time I think about it. So I want to give you the last few moments here to wrap up anything that's on your mind, lay any last pearl of wisdom you want to lay down for somebody. And
well, first,
you got the floor.
I want to say, I've got chills. I got a tear in my eye. Listening to that incredible testimony, because what you said right there shows true leadership, not wannabe leadership. Taking the, you don't take the credit alone. I'm sure you share the credit, but it's harder to take the heat like you did, for your team, because you knew it was you, and you're not going to let people run over your people that you work so hard in developing, and to allow an event like that to crush somebody for the rest of their lives. Amazing, powerful testimony. I'm glad you shared that today for others to hear that. A lot of people needed to hear that one. So fantastic. I applaud you so much, Vic.
And thank you, Randy. Thank you so much. For those who don't know, we have a company that's called Caption. And Randy was one of the early guys I tapped to help us and be an advisor in that company. And it wasn't because I just needed another guy who looked like Blake Shelton on the advisory committee.
Oh my gosh. You're stretching.
But I needed somebody thoughtful, measured, with great experience, with great compassion. And I think here in the last hour and 20 minutes or so, the audience knows a little bit more about what I know about you, Randy, and why you have found success, who you are, and you've left behind a lot of great nuggets here for people to latch onto here. So I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. It has been my pleasure, and I feel fortunate to have been given the opportunity to use this platform to share more about who you are with everybody who's listening.
Well, thank you, Vic, so much. This has been my pleasure, and the journey continues.
It sure does. Stay tuned. Thank you, Randy. Hey, folks. Thanks for tuning into the show. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, the Podcast Index, and Podcasting 2.0. We'd really appreciate if you download Fountain, find us there, and support us via Value for Value. We hope you enjoy the show. Happy listening.